Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Behind the Photobook. Thank you for joining us. This episode we are chatting to Max Ferguson, who, as always, a dear friend, someone that we've kind of sort of grown up, I guess, in the industry together. We sort of started making things around the same sort of time. We've done exhibitions together. We've been involved in sort of zine making and that sort of that growth of over the last 10, 15 years of sharing stuff on things like Tumblr and stuff like that, and then getting into Max has made magazines like Splash and Grab, and he was a freelance picture editor for the FT, as well as working for numerous other magazines. But he's just got into publishing his own photo books as well. He started a new press called Oval Press. And he's produced 2 new books. So we've got DEADFALL, and his previous book was Whistling for the Owls, and this is the DEADFALL one. So we're going to be having a conversation just about the new book, how he sort of got into starting a publishing company, and the kind of ins and outs of what it takes to really make a photo book. So I'm really excited for this conversation to be out in the world. It was a really great chat. As always, Behind the Photobook is a series of conversations that delve into the backstory behind making the book, what that really entails. Not so much about the project as a whole, but what it's like to actually put a book together, what it's like to be on press, what it's like to choose different papers, all that sort of stuff. So we're talking to photographers, book designers, bookshop owners, distributors, and just to try and give you a really clear overview of what it's like to make photo books today. This series is sponsored by Rapid Eye. So Rapid Eye Darkrooms, which is part of Photobook Cafe, which is based just down the road from us at 79 Leonard Street. If you ever need to get film processed, digital C-type printing, hand printing, workshops, it's all there. And also Photobook Cafe. If you haven't visited us, we're based in Shoreditch in London. We're a cafe, bar, event space, gallery. We have a collection of self-published and published photo books that have been donated by different photographers from all over the world. We have about 600 photo books within our collection. We also run zine making clubs. We have a bookshop, which you can find at Rapid Eye, and also online. So please check that out. And yeah, I love how this series is going. Hopefully you're enjoying it. And thank you very much for joining us again. This is my conversation with Max Ferguson. We've been friends for a long time, and it's great to I think this is our first sort of ever interview sort of conversation that we've
I think so, yeah. And we have been friends certainly since I started out in photography, like through Photocopy Club and everything. It's nice to kind of things to come in full circle a bit, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Over a decade.
Oh man, I think it's like so interesting for a bunch of us that have sort of grown up in that early sharing images scene to just see the trajectory and how it does all sort of it is a great melting pot of everyone still sort of coming together, and it's great to see that sort of progression from making little zines or putting stuff out online to starting publishing companies or becoming teachers and all that sort of stuff. I think it's so great.
To the real world.
I know.
We made it. We're here.
So we are going to be talking about your new book, DEADFALL. So I'd love to just get a little bit of a backstory behind this new book and how it sort of came about.
Yeah, I guess like in a way it's a follow-on from my last book, Whistling for Owls, and in a way it's completely different. It's about 2.5 years in the making. It's in a way it's kind of hard for me to think of it even as a photography book, because although it's pictures, it's really I think the text to it that carries it through. Like it's really for me a story more than anything, and it's this very, very loose story about kind of loneliness, desire, loss, I guess kind of just like running away from things generally. And that is carried both in the pictures and the text. But
you mentioned as well, this is kind of like a novel. You kind of treat it in a novel sense. What's that? How does that sort of? Do you do much writing?
I love writing. I find it really, really difficult. The writing comes so much less naturally than taking pictures for me, but is such a kind of, I can't imagine the two existing without each other in my practice anymore. I write quite a lot. I really find it useful to kind of, I guess my problem really with photography more than anything is that it's really bad, like for me, at carrying a narrative through things. And we learn a lot about narrative and photography. I teach narrative and photography. Like we're always saying that there's this that photographs are good at narrative, but actually the more I spend time with them and the more I make things, actually I'm so frustrated with the narrative capabilities of photography. There's just so many gaps in how they can do things, and actually text is so good at narrative that we're so used to reading stories. I mean, even I guess spoken word, kind of music, things like that are very good at telling stories. So it's about kind of having just enough text to fill the gaps of what the photographs can't do, I guess.
Right.
Is what I'm really interested in. But I'm not 100% sure even what it's about. I don't know. Yeah, I still haven't worked out what the last one's about completely. So
what was the process? So it's all shot in France?
Yeah, it's all shot in France around this village where I went to school for a bit as a kid.
Oh, I didn't know you went.
Yeah, I went to school for 6 months there as a kid. My parents live there now. Yeah, so it's kind of a return to childhood. The text is based kind of half in this imaginary place that's there and half in memories of growing up in London as well. So it's kind of this duality there as well of these kind of two lives being drawn to two different places, I guess, which is also the text and image drawn between these places too.
Okay. No, I mean, this is actually the first time I'm seeing this. I haven't actually seen it. It's beautifully printed. What was your? So obviously you've done a lot of work. I mean, you teach at LCC and you've been a photo editor as well. What are the sort of things that you bring into putting a book together that you've learned through those sort of processes? Because you've done a lot of like magazine work, especially. What differences do you find between working in a sort of editorial sense to then actually bringing that into something that's more of a an artist book?
That's a really good question. Something I've thought about a lot as well. I think I try and work in the same way, like laying out magazine spreads. I'm very lucky. The place I work, Granta, we work in kind of long form photography.
Okay.
It's often laying out sequences either on 8, 16 or 24 pages of continuous photography. So it's like a mini zine or a book almost every time you do it.
Yeah.
So I find like that's one of the things I just enjoy most is putting one photograph next to another and seeing how they change. So like the main time spent making a book like this for me is sequencing 100%. I spend months and months and months working late into the night sequencing images, laying things out on InDesign, printing dummies, seeing how they look. And it's almost the most enjoyable part, I think, for me, that like the kind of just constantly working through problems, trying to fix them. And that's exactly what I'm lucky enough to do as a job, I guess, as well as a photo editor is kind of similar on a kind of very different scale. It's much quicker. You can't spend months and months and months working on one feature for a magazine, but this, I guess, allows me to indulge in some of those ideas for a little bit longer.
Do you find that when you're editing, what's your process is it a big wall? Is everything laid out on the floor? Are you just working directly on the computer? And is that editing? Do you find yourself coming back to an original edit, or does it really, like writing? Does it really sort of, do you write the first draft and then really sort of start to fill it out, basically?
I think that's interesting. I definitely do 90% of stuff on the computer. That's where the most amount of time is spent on InDesign, playing around with things. But I make a lot of physical things as well. Like I must have made 20, 30 dummies for this book along the way. I love bookbinding. I love all of those as kind of processes. So it's a really like integral part of the thing. I also spend a lot of time in the darkroom printing, and that's kind of a way where I kind of work through some of the ideas on the individual images is in the darkroom.
So this is all film.
It's all film, but
All
these are all
hand-printed.
scans from film.
Right.
None of them are darkroom prints. That's kind of like, it exists in separate ways with the darkroom and the scans, I guess. I like the quality of the Imicon scans on the offset paper. I think it's a nice combo.
And do you find yourself going? Yeah, I guess leaning back, do you find yourself doing an initial edit, and does that have a strength? Are you, once you get to the end, you're like, oh, I kind of had it at the first point. I think for me, as when I'm editing books, I was talking to Mars, who's one of the videos coming up, and I was saying that a lot of the time when I put stuff down, I have such a quick editing process that actually when I sit and think about something for too long, if I take I'll put that aside for 2 months, or I'll come back to it, I actually end up just going back to the original quite a lot of the time. But obviously everyone works differently. But.
Yeah, it's always full circle, I think, because I mean the first editing is, I think, beyond obviously when you're taking the pictures, but certainly when you sit down and scan the work. So you've got this film developed, you're sitting there at the scanner and you're scanning things for the first time. That editing process is already beginning then. Like, you see an image, you're drawn to it, you have this reaction. And I think that I often come back probably to that. Even looking through old dummies and stuff, you find spreads that are kind of the same that you first had, and then maybe you left and came back to. But like, even more than that, I found this first ever book I made, like way before we even did Tumblr things together. Way before that, I made this like blurb style book online. Things I shot on my phone, and I just found this copy of it, and I made it on a holiday in France when I was a kid, and I found this copy of it, and it's like some of the pictures are just the same that's in this one, and it's like I had no memory of even really making this book or anything.
Oh wow.
And I was kind of looking through, and I was like there's one picture that we just went past of like a railway track.
That picture is so nice.
And like, I didn't even know I'd been here before, but I've got that picture in the book that I made when I was like 15 or something.
The same.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So it's like, that really interests me, that maybe I was actually being drawn, because the whole book's really about being drawn back to these memories of the past anyway.
Yeah.
And to be drawn back to somewhere I'd already photographed but couldn't even remember was kind of like, it really made me think that actually beyond the editing process, I've been kind of trying to wrestle with these ideas all of my life, really. And I've tried, I guess, in the meantime, to be different types of photographer, done all these things, but really, I just want to photograph like abandoned buildings and kind of like bleak looking like landscapes of things, and then maybe that's all right.
I'm just gonna close this door.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think, like, for me, and I think also when you sort of start getting into photography, it's very much like, how am I going to, one is your interest, so you start photographing maybe your friends, people around you, it's very diaristic, and then you sort of think like, how can I maybe make money out of this? So maybe you start getting into sort of fashion or shooting bands or going down the sort of portraiture route. And I think as I did all that, and as I get older, I do now just want no people. I just want it's like an Eggleston quote, isn't it? Like photographing life today, in a sense, but you're just sort of, I don't know, maybe if I got like shyer, or maybe my friends weren't doing as interesting things as they used to, but I think I just got, and maybe it's just what you sort of more get interested in within photography in general. You end up sort of going to this idea of just very, very still, very you as like a wanderer, and just sort of documenting place, basically, which I think is really interesting. How we sort of progress into that kind of.
Yeah, it is interesting you say that, because we're all drawn, aren't we, to like youth culture when we're young, like, and I think that like when you are really young, like very exciting things are happening around you all the time, and you're living in this kind of chaotic world of kind of hedonism and fun, and actually that's something that I think we're all drawn to documenting while we're in it. And actually, yeah,
it's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the kind of missed tones and mistakes are all in here, and yeah, just getting more and more depressing as we get older, aren't we? less about fun and more about loss and the complexities of life.
Do you find like going into a project like this, do you have something kind of set with the direction of it? Are you sort of is it more just to go and just wander, see what you see, and then sort of make a sort of connection afterwards, or are you already sort of building that connection before you're taking the pictures?
You know what? This one, the thing that really started it was the title. I had this idea for the title, and titles are so hard, I think, anyway, and nearly always come towards the end for most people, I think. But I had this idea of a title. I found some old images that my parents actually found, this kind of old archive that had been thrown in a bin in France, and it really made me kind of think about this idea of kind of, it was just like one family's life that'd been discarded in the suitcase, and it kind of was all around this area, this exact area where I'd spent so much time, and I was already kind of thinking about making work there. And that finding that archive, originally the idea was to kind of incorporate that in. That never really it never really happened, this kind of found images. But they definitely started the process of coming up with the idea. I had this idea, DEADFALL, which I love as a word because it's so full of dread, but it also has like two meanings. It's really an American word, I think, but it means like, it's either like fallen wood in a forest that kind of creates these kind of big masses of kind of like decaying wood in a, and then it's also a type of trap where like something heavy falls on something is also a deadfall.
Right.
And I like that duality of kind of photography in this book being like that. It's like one, this decaying matter, but there's also maybe it's slightly a game or a trap as well that you can fall into.
Yeah.
You kind of read in one way or another.
No, that's interesting.
So
I guess
yeah.
I think like, I don't know, Deadfall to me sounds like, is there already a computer game called Deadfall?
It's kind of that vibe, isn't it? There's definitely like a trashy horror film called Deadfall.
Yeah. It's sort of...
And I read a lot of horror when I was doing this as well. Like it
Right.
kind of is. If there was one influence, it's like probably horror literature in here, and that feeling of dread. I'm really, really interested in. I love it as a theme, and I don't think it needs to always be a negative thing. I kind of like that you can have a pleasure in dreading something a little bit, and it's a kind of. I was thinking about this, like where horror films are so much of them, or horror literature, especially this like North American tradition of horror literature, so much of it's set in these kind of quite rural, bleak winter landscapes.
Yeah.
And that's something I was drawn. So this is all shot in like pure midwinter. Everything's dead. Everything's abandoned. It's an area that has some tourism in the summer, but in the winter there's no one there. And it's like that creates all of these great spaces you can just walk into because there's no one there.
Have you ever been to anywhere in the States like New Hampshire and like New England?
No, but I want to go so badly. Like that's where I want it. Like if like I could, I'd go there and make a project. I would love to go to those kind of like, I don't know, even like the Catskill Mountains or somewhere like that, where it's just like.
Because I think did you grow up reading Goosebumps?
Yeah.
So I read Goosebumps a lot, and I think I also read a lot of like Calvin and Hobbes as well, and it was always sort of situated in those sort of very like New England kind of white picket fence, the house, but then there's sort of this sort of big industry. You've got kind of like I guess kind of a bit like the Rust Belt kind of thing all around there, and it is and all those sort of like you were saying, those kind of stories kind of link into that sort of that interesting place of like countryside but old industry, the decline of stuff, but then also these very sort of idyllic kind of homes and the white picket fence and the grass that runs to the pavement and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's something in what you just said that's so I just couldn't get out of my head while I was making this work, is this idea of the industry in the countryside. So a lot of the things I'm photographing here are like maybe like farming industry, light factories or wood industries, things like that. And like that is something I find so fascinating. This like is this balance between life and death, I think is so apparent in the countryside more than anywhere else.
Yeah.
It's such a fine line there, and it's like hunting happens. Like people are so used to the kind of the act of killing, but also this kind of idea that once you're gone, what you had might just decay back into the ground. And I think that's just such a beautiful idea. You find,
I mean, you're kind of leading with that, aren't you? With that sort of this first image of the leaf.
yeah. There's lots of. I try and lead as much as possible without giving, like, I like the idea of like, here's something that might invoke something, and that's it. Like, if I can achieve that, if I can just get you kind of thinking why, that's all I need, that's all I want. Everything else is kind of secondary. And the book is really like a question, I guess. But yeah, it's just kind of an indulgence into taking pictures of things I find beautiful that I'm not sure.
But then with the text, like obviously we spoke a little bit about sort of spoken word or I guess poetry in a sense. You have these sort of small little. Would you say they're poems, or would you say?
I wouldn't say they're poems, but I can understand that there's poetic aspects to them, probably. I think, but that's maybe just because I find the idea, like, poetry is such an elite art form, and it's so difficult that, like, I wouldn't like to think I'd do it, but maybe they're very bad poems. I might settle for that.
I don't know. So like this first bit of text, if you can see it on the page, so it's like, "Are you coming home?" or "What are you even doing there? Just come home," or "Don't come home," and once, "I love you." It's pretty poetic.
Yeah, pretty cliched as well.
No, but it's nice, and I do like when you get these sort of because I think it's interesting when you integrate image and text, because I'm quite a big fan of, with a photo book especially, is to put all the text at the end, even if you are having any. And I quite like the poetic title. I quite like a long sort of saying. When I'm doing research about, like, if I've done like a project in Texas or something like that, I'll sort of go in and look at poetry about Texas, or sort of try and find like songs or stuff about the place, and then I'll take sections of that to sort of build a title. I do like that sort of poeticness, and I think when going into a book, I like to sort of have just all the imagery tell me everything, and at the end, if I want to sort of reiterate that more in word, I would put that at the back. But it's nice, I think this has a really nice flow to it with these little sections of text, because obviously they're not, we just have which is just, and the lines went dead, then the lines went dead, which it has that sort of nice link to the horror, or the aspect to it. It's kind of foreboding lines. And the photography, man, your photography is just, I mean, I always knew you were a good photographer, but this is just it's a very beautiful book, and it feels beautiful. What was the sort of choices that you went into in terms of like actual paper and design of this? Because we have Whistling for Hours, which is, it's just a little bit bigger, but not too much. What was your sort of process into the actual design aspect?
Yeah, it's funny. I always make small things, and this was meant to be like my big book, and then I made it, and it's actually it's not really any bigger at all, is it? But yeah, I like this. I think a lot about paper, and part of my work as a photo editor for various magazines, for Splash and Grab, my own magazine, and now for Granta and for other places, has been this kind of think about production things, and working directly with printers, thinking about how offset printing reacts to different papers. I find it so fascinating, and it's such a beautiful quality to offset printing that's kind of unlike anything else, really. And what I really like about this is the softness of the paper. I'm so happy with. It's a paper that lots of people actually use. It's Munken Lynx, which is I use for Whistling for Owls as well. And it's a very beautiful paper, but with the offset printing, the ink like really sinks into it, and it means some of the images are slightly flatter, which is a personal preference. Like, I print either too dark or quite flat sometimes. I really like that look, but it's certainly not the like classic coated paper where like black and white duotones or tritones kind of really pop out the page. This is like kind of my hope with everything. Like, all of these are just tiny decisions, I guess, like to help draw you in. I hope that the softness kind of adds something to that in a way. And it's the same, the relationship between text and image is kind of there to draw you in a little bit, and the sequencing. But in terms of like all of those choices, yeah, I really like, they're the bits I enjoy the most. I think about making it is like working out those problems and thinking about them. And like, I always think that like, until that, my favorite bits are the bit until it's released. And actually there's so much talk about dread in the book, the dread of holding the finished thing in your hands once it's been sent to the printers, like dreading a mistake, dreading what the print quality is going to be like, any of that, although you've kind of factored in as much of that as possible. But then that bit after that, I find it so difficult. I'm so bad at press, I'm so bad at all of that stuff. And I just want to make books. Like that's all. Like for me, it's almost like I'd do this even if I just made one, and it was just for myself. I'd still do it.
Do you go on press?
I have been on press many times. I don't go on press for these, partly because I work with a printer who I've used so many times. I trust them.
Right.
I've got a really good relationship.
And where are they?
Them. So that's Copa in Lithuania.
Okay.
They're great. Highly recommend.
And what are your choices for printing out of the UK?
Yeah, so we used, when I first started getting into print, and offset was with Splash and Grab, my magazine back in the day. And we printed first in the UK. We had a great printer that went bust, along with so many other printers. We then moved to another printer in the UK, and kind of randomly Copa just reached out to us and asked if we wanted to have a meeting. We met with them. They were so nice. They were in London. They kind of talked about what they could do, like options. They were so helpful in a way that I hadn't really known a printer could be.
Right.
So it was really that, like, they just helped from the very beginning. And after that, there was no reason to leave them. Like, they're cheap, they're good, they care so much. We can talk with them about sustainability, things like that. They're very open to those kind of discussions.
Oh, wow.
I think they care especially about making cool things for artists and photographers and stuff as well, rather than just kind of being a massive print house. And it's really that, like, the most important thing for me is just having someone I trust, and I think,
and has an understanding of what you're trying to say in print.
Yeah, exactly.
And then what was the choice between sort of doing these sort of section papers that sort of split everything up? Because there's a few, right? So we have this maroon color and then a black as well.
So there's a few, and they're all kind of double pages, like faced pages, so it kind of acts like it's almost like a single pause in the book, hopefully. That came from just making dummies, really, and kind of sequencing it and feeling like I needed something that wasn't photographs to kind of hold a page. I wasn't, like, we often leave pages white in photo books, which is like is a really nice thing to do. Sometimes it creates this like pause, and it kind of makes things nice and calm, kind of like on this spread here, it's a calmness that we have.
You give people a breather.
Yeah, and I wanted something that's kind of the opposite. Sometimes like you're watching even a horror film or something, and these like the screen might just flash black or flash red while you're watching it, and these colors are kind of they're the two colors that are kind of most kind of dangerous in a way for that. It's not like they're the calmest, but the red I calmed down, and it's quite dark, so it is like that maroonish as well.
Yeah, it's a really nice color actually. Can we have a look at some dummies then as well?
Yeah, of course.
For people that don't say the word dummy, which is also a maquette, I guess, as well, which is also used, but really it's just something that people would make. You can make them just on a home printer, on a laser printer, just something cheap and affordable, just a bunch of just to be able to sort of get an outline of the work, because I think we also work so much on the computer, and if you're working that way, if you just then send the book off to the printers, you really have no idea of the feel, the flow, how it feels in the person's hands, which I think is so important when making books, is actually what the person who's reading it, what they're going to feel. And I think, just jumping back to this one, is the paper lends such a soft, the work is soft and the paper is, and it's so calming to read. But I really like this sort of heavyweight carded cover with sort of the open. We have this sort of open spine.
Yeah, that ended up being one of the most expensive choices
Yeah,
I've ever made. It's like these simple ideas you have that are just not quite normal processes for printers just end up being really, really costly. But
I think
I'm really happy with it.
We are seeing a lot of the open spine in sort of publishing today. Why do you think that is, that people like to sort of show that? Well, I guess people want to show the inner workings, really, don't they? They want to.
Yeah, there's definitely that. The main consideration for me was that it can open and lie flat when you do that, so the pages can kind of. And if you see, so a dummy here, this uses a stitching that I know you use in your books, which is like a French link stitch.
Yeah.
And because I was making these dummies that can open and lie flat, I wanted some of that as well. Like that was the way. So that's a direct. It's almost like a dummy that's bound in a hardback, like that. You can see here the terrible design choices I was thinking about for covers and stuff, and images like this that never made it.
I mean, this is like. I mean, how often do we get to see like those actual inner workings of what comes beforehand? You know, and even this is obviously the first image that we see, and how that's been sort of. How that is pushed back. Does the text change much in these dummies?
I think the text is probably. This is quite a late dummy, so there are a lot. This first like sequence of images is very close to how it runs.
Do we have something that's like a fur? Like, are they quite?
These are both quite close, but you'll see here that this one acts in a different way. That this is unbound, and that allows me to kind of move stuff around,
pull the sections
up,
apart.
Exactly. Tear a picture open. So I think this one was made just before the other one. So you can see there's like scrawled notes on there and stuff, and kind of moving text around. So they're kind of.
And this just made on the photocopier.
Yeah, just made on a printer. Thinking about sequence again, you can't just work on a computer. That's impossible.
Yeah.
For me anyway, to visualize that. I don't know, I'm sure people manage, but making this as I said, like maybe 20-30 of these got made in different kind of formats, but yeah, I probably got to the point where I was making, there was like at least two after this one that were like more final dummies that are sewn together, because I think you also need to kind of live with it as a final object for a while as well.
Definitely.
So yeah, this one, yeah, it's kind of reassuring to see how close it actually is. I can it's funny how like certain crops have changed that really kind of, I'm so glad I did, but it's so unimportant in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, it's really, it's so nice to see that inner working, and also for me as a sort of like a photocopier or like printer lover, I'm like, oh, it's so much more contrasty, and like this, like, you know, you can see the sort of changes in the colors and stuff like that, which like,
no,
you know, you see this beautiful jump, and you know, this is, you know, so beautifully done, but you know, these become, you know, they're sort of the pieces in their own right, really. And I think that's what's nice about when artists especially donate maquettes and dummies to institutions and stuff, that you actually get to see that sort of those inner workings before sort of the final. Really, truly, artists like thought, you know, what do I want this to be? But I also kind of like the cheapness and how that sort of changes the images. It does give a completely different sort of feel to the work.
No, I completely agree, actually. And although, as I was saying, I love offset printing, is such an incredibly kind of beautiful and kind of, in a digital world, a kind of analog process. But like by far my next favorite printer is like an office photocopier. Preferably one in a work where I don't have to pay for it or something, and I can just rinse through. And like the first zines I ever made, they were probably, I remember we did a book fair. You did a kind of thing in Bristol with
One Giant Arm.
Yeah, with One Giant Arm with Joe and
Tommy.
Yeah, exactly. And we did that, and I sold this zine there that I'd made in the bike shop I was working on, the office printer, while my boss was on lunch or something. I just kind of,
so good.
It's like, that's how I grew up making books. So I love that process still, and I think that I
By any
completely
means
agree that
necessary.
like I love the quality of these images, and actually, what gets lost is when you actually print digital on mass runs, you lose that kind of that I think that like almost feel where the toner sits on top of the page so
Hmm.
nicely on a kind of office printer.
And this is just like cheap standard copy paper, right?
Cheap, yeah, yeah.
Would you ever do like test prints in this way on like the Munkin that you then ended up using?
Yeah, so
Or...
there's different levels. One, I'll print on the Munkin. I also printed on some like different papers to try. It's very, very hard to see though the difference between. So for Whistling for Hours, I paid quite a lot of money to get very expensive laser prints made on the Munkin on the exact same paper.
Right.
It looks so different to the final thing.
Okay.
But what I will also always do, so I'm not on press, but I get color chromalin proofs made of everything on uncoated paper, which is like 99.9% accurate for color or something.
Right.
And that's a process I've learned from working in magazines. It's that kind of color proofing when you're not on press, and how kind of to get accurate, working on color calibrated screens, which is funny because actually I do all of this work, and then actually, like if you're a color purist or a photography purist, you'll look at this book and think all the colors are completely wrong. Like there's casts over everything. Like so often I'll do a scan and I'll be like, oh my god, I love it, I'm not touching that. And it's the same when I print in the darkroom.
Yeah,
Like,
I guess that's like I mean, jumping back to that image of the tower, like
yeah,
it's just the blues are just so.
yeah, that's exactly an example of that, where it's like I've just scanned it and was like, oh god, I love it, it's staying. Like not fixing that at all. So it's like I go through all of those processes to actually keep the colors as wrong as I want them. And it's the same, like I came to this realization that I'm never going to retouch dust out of an image, which is just one of the most kind of time-saving and beautiful realizations I think I could come to, that I'm just going to, like, if there's dust on there, it's meant to be there, and it's part of the image.
I mean, I haven't seen it. It feels particularly clean. I don't particularly think there's anything that sort of jumps out at me in terms of like dust or anything on.
It's there.
It is there.
The softness helps
maybe,
as well. Yeah. I mean, even like a hair I might leave or something. Like I just can't spend that much time doing that kind of thing. It doesn't give me the joy.
Yeah.
And there's kind of a romance to it as well that you can lean into.
I mean, let's just sort of have a look at those sort
that's
of comparisons
a nice one
of what we get from how much we can sort of show, or how much you'll be able to see sort of the differences between the.
Yeah, there's a lot more green in the laser.
Wow, beautiful. And so, what's been your relationship? Not relationship. I guess. What's been your sort of process or your idea behind starting your own publishing company? Because you started Oval Press in 2020.
2022.
2022. With the idea to release your first book, Whistling for the Owls. Were you looking for a publisher? Was it always the idea to self-publish it? Or do you view this as self-publishing, or do you view this as being published? Is
kind of a bit of everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
I would love to stand here and just say that like, I was totally against working with other publishers. I wanted to set up my own thing. I emailed, like, when I made this book, this was the result of my MA, Whistling for Owls, so I made it while I was studying on my MA. And I was very like considered with the whole process again of sequencing. I fell in love with that process, making this book really. And I reached out to like maybe picked my 10 favorite publishers or people that I really respected and wrote to them with the kind of this book and sent it. I knew like as soon as I sent it, I was just like, I'm not going to hear back. And I heard back from one publisher who said they were going to get back to me and never did. And apart from that, no responses. But really that kind of is the same energy that kind of thing can give you, I think, is why I started Splash and Grab back in the day, was this idea that like there's actually not a space for what I want to do and do it. And like that's the kind of kick sometimes you need, I think, just to start something. I knew I like, in a way, I kind of sat down and thought about what do I need a publisher for?
Yeah.
What can I do? And I thought, I've already done the design of the book. So a big thing a publisher brings is design skills, right? I've already done that. I have the contacts with printers. I already work with them. Like that's kind of my career, is working with printers and producing things in print. So I've got that. The real thing is distribution and kind of press. Those things are really hard. But both of those things are things you can collaborate with and work with.
Yeah, or directly with a distributor.
Exactly.
As well, yeah.
So I was lucky to work with a distributor on both of these books, which takes so much pressure off, and kind of having those relationships that I had from Splash and Grab. Again, like it was kind of that. It's like I'd already gone through this with a magazine, so a lot of this is kind of all of those skills, relationships, even with bookshops, like people who stock Splash and Grab, I could write to and say, thanks so much for supporting me for all those years. This is something new I'm doing. Would you consider taking it? Here's the distributor. And I think that process, like, was quite easy for me in a way, that bit. But yeah, the more I think, actually, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, though, and it wasn't why I started it at all, but it's really taught me that I'm so interested, like more than interested, like the thing I care the most about with my work, with photography, with all of this, is having complete control over my own practice.
Yeah.
And that's more important than success for me, like so much more important than kind of having a big show or something. Anything like that is being able to do it. And we're talking, obviously I'm making work obviously to show here as well, and printing and framing, and it's like the fact that I can print in a dark room and make my own work. I can make my own frames that I've taught myself, like that. I don't care if they're not the best frames. The fact that I can make them,
Yeah.
and that I print the work, and I can design my own book, and I can do that. Like for me, that's heaven as an artist, really, I think. And I don't really need anything more than that. So long as I can do things and make what I want to make, and like running your own publishing thing is a huge part of being allowed to do that. But yeah, the next step is also working and collaborating with other people on their books as well.
Do you see just flicking through this now, do you see, is this like a number two? Are these two separate books, do you feel, or do they combine?
It's interesting because there's the first bit of text in that, well, on the kind of title page of Whistling for Owls, it says it's a story in two parts. Now, this isn't the second part, but it's also not unconnected.
It's like an interlude.
And it's certainly, yeah, and maybe it depends. You could read it. It both is and it isn't at the same time, right? They're certainly coming from a similar place, both in their form of kind of text and image. They're both kind of delves inwards. They're both complete works of fiction at the same time. So it's like there's so many crossovers. I think that like there were lots of questions I had unanswered from making Whistling for Owls. Like I was more just asking loads of questions, and I was hoping Deadfall would kind of answer some of those, but unfortunately it's probably just asked a lot more.
Okay.
And I still just like this medium of making photography and making stuff, like I've still got no idea what I'm doing, and that's why I keep doing it, I think, because it's so fun to work in that way where you're just trying things out. Like I think if I ever know what I'm doing and I think, okay, this means this piece of text will mean that, and this photograph next to this one means that, and I'll be sure of that, then I'm kind of done in a way. I can't imagine ever getting there with photography though, because it's so loose and nuanced. But yeah, there's definitely, like, even in the fonts that are in there, the papers, that they're intentionally produced in kind of similar ways.
A similar flow as well, I think, as well. And how do you find, is it quite easy for you just to have that complete mix of colour and black and white? Is that easy to?
I mean, that's one of these things that I think shocks me so much, that people find that unusual, because people
mention it a lot, don't they? When they see a colour and a black and white work together, they think that. I think that's
Yeah. So one, I just shoot in black and white and color like all of the time. So when I'm out, this is all shot on a like my Mira Z and a 4x5. So I'm mixing between color and black and white constantly during that process. I might be in one place, I'll shoot a roll of film and I'll think, okay, I need to see this in black and white as well. Or you might think, okay, this tree needs to be in color, and then you get in there and there's some textured things that would just look so nice on a kind of moody black and white. So you're constantly, everything is made on the decision of those shots. And then when it's sequenced, I think maybe that's from magazines, because you're just so used to like, here's 10, you might, if you're working on like something like the FT weekend where I worked for a long time, you're not necessarily sequencing together a beautiful photo essay or something. That's you often are, but it may be some news images, or you're working with kind of even found photography, or like researching images from all sorts of things, and you're constantly just putting images together because of what they mean and not because they're necessarily kind of really great images. And that's taught me, I think, so much. But no, I think the black and white and color, but also the softness of everything helps that. I think because the colors are soft, the paper's soft.
Yeah, there's nothing jarring about
black
it.
and white soft. Whereas if it was on a kind of really bright coated paper and the black and whites were super contrasty, it would, I think, be harder to sequence. I've never really worked in that way for this, but I don't. It's in like for Whistling for Owls though. I was so determined that it was like so random, the black and white and the color. And then when I came to finally print the book and export all the files and do the color work, the final color work to the images, you turn all the colors to CMYK and all the black and whites to grayscale, and there was exactly the same amount of both. So it's like, which really like was so unintentional.
Yeah.
But like obviously that balance had kind of found itself. But yeah, it's all about, I think sequencing in books, like it's all about balance, right? Like that's, well, you're trying to build a rhythm and a balance between things, and exactly that, like trying to not let things jar.
Yeah, we did an interview with Michael Collins, and we would say structure. It has that balance and that structure, and that's the structure. It's interesting that there was that complete, the same color, same black and white throughout it, and that's just completely by accident, but it's sort of
also completely on purpose in the like scheme of things, isn't it?
Wow. So I guess sort of as a last kind of question, would you do anything differently? Are you completely content? Is there anything that you were like, oh, I missed that, or I would, for the next one I'll do this? What's the learning of making this that you can then take to the next?
Wow, what a question. I kind of feel like that's like, what would you change about your child or something? Like how, like the amount, I'm the most biased person about this because it's like, I can't see either that it's good or that it's bad. It's just kind of what it is. I'd say that like the relief that it looked in a way that I was happy with when the first one arrives, they sent an advance copy, like that relief is kind of just, I can't really compare it almost to anything else because you put 2 years of work, 2.5 years of work into something. There's things I've sworn that like cost wise, I can't make a book that is such a bad financial investment again, but I definitely will. So that's kind of irrelevant. But like things like there's all these, I talk a lot to my students about this as well, and about like how you structure the pricing of a book or something. And
I was just going to ask that.
And maybe that's something just interesting to talk about a bit. Like really, if you think about it, so a bookshop takes 40% when they sell it. A distributor takes 20% as well. So any copies you sell through a shop, you're left with 40% of the cover price. So really, I always think, and whether it's a magazine or a book, it's the same. That should be your maximum cost per copy. It should be 40% of the price you sell it for. So if you sell it for £10, your cost per copy should be £4. Now that doesn't really work because also I'm really, really keen that this isn't a book that people can't afford. I talked a lot with kind of asking advice about Whistling for Owls. I was so determined that it should stay at a price that people could afford it. And interestingly, so many people who bought it were students and people who are kind of can't afford a lot of photography books, I think. And that, like, for me, that's just the most beautiful thing. Like, I love teaching. There's a dedication in the back of this book to my students. And like the fact that, like, if you can only afford one book, you're going to buy something that's a bit cheaper than like the £50 book or something. So that relationship is not right in this book price wise. That, like, if I sold it in shops, it's not quite the profit margins you'd want. But again, I said I'm bad at all of this stuff. Like, I'm a terrible, terrible business person. I'm never going to make money off this stuff. So, like, they're all things that I kind of want to change, but I also will never change, because I just, like, we don't make books or magazines or zines or whatever it is to make money. Like, how people can have bigger publishing places and do it is incredible. I'm so glad they exist, because they fund things and they kind of create these really interesting spaces in photography. But I'm not interested in doing that. I just want to make some books for me and people who are excited about it. So the pricing of that, including, so like this cover here with like this, so this like card here, this thick card, and then also this cover is printed on carton board, which is mostly used for industrial packaging.
Okay.
So it's kind of white on one side to print on, and then like natural card on the inside. So like if you get a box of pasta or a box of coffee or something, it will always be like that.
Right.
So it's used all the time in industrial packaging, but it's very, very expensive to print on it just one off for a book, or for them to buy it in. For them to glue this entire card cost, like, half of the production costs of this went into the cover. And it meant that the book was almost double as expensive as Whistling for Owls, even though it's only a little bit bigger. It's got more pages. Costs are always going up, but I couldn't double the price to sell it, because then none of the people I want to buy it would be able to afford it. I mean, I couldn't afford it.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good thing to be conscious of, I think. And I think, like, when you get into this realm of artist books, like, especially, like, I'll hand make like 50 copies of a book. Like, how, I don't even
they should be worth hundreds.
think how to, like, how to do that. But I guess as well, I come especially so much from a culture where I want stuff to be affordable. I want people to be able to own it. I don't particularly agree with art being insanely expensive, and it should be accessible. And I think that's like the great thing about zine making, and especially coming at it with a self-publishing kind of point of view, and especially having that connection to your students, that you're seeing on a ground level, like what is going to be the accessible point for the people that I want to see this book. So what's the cost? So it's 40?
No, 30.
30, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it comes with a print or a special
Yeah,
edition,
so there's
right?
different versions, and that was kind of that's a way that I kind of learned from Whistling for Owls, actually, of kind of staggering those price points so that people can afford it. It's 30 just for the normal book. It's then 35 for a signed copy, or 40 for a copy with a print that's also
I
signed.
think that's a really nice scale.
I think that especially it's a way of just people, if they want to invest slightly more in the project, they can. If they want a print, it's a cheap way of getting a print. And to be honest, I copied the sign thing from Mac. Like, they charge £5 for a signed book,
Right,
so
okay.
like, if they can do it,
Yeah,
why
yeah.
not? But it is also a way of kind of like, you can still get the book, and then as soon as it sells out, I'll do what Whistling for Owls I did, where the PDF's for free online. So it kind of does live beyond the actual book format as well.
Nice. That's a really nice way to do it. And then, final. What advice would you give to someone wanting to get into publishing their first book?
Just do it. It's the most, like, enjoyable, and it's not as difficult as you think. Of course, start small. Like, I started learning to publish first online. Like we started Splash and Grab on Tumblr at the same time you guys were on it. That community are the people who first funded a copy of Splash and Grab through a Kickstarter. That's the only time we needed to do that because of that kind of community that started it. But like I make, in between these books, I make so many little handmade books, like a handmade zine. Like let's say you just fold 10 sheets of paper in half and sew it down the middle. That's like a 40-page book. It's quite substantial. It's so easy to make. It's so cheap to produce. Like you can then think about even that from the price points, at how much does that cost you, how much you're going to sell it for, and then you can reach out. Like having a distributor is great, but you can reach out directly to shops as well. Just ask to speak to the book buyer. That's how I first started distribution, was dealing directly with book buyers, taking it, like walking into a shop with copies and just saying, "Will you take them?" Like it's much harder for that to be turned down than an email. Like emails are so ignorable. We are all guilty of that, and I get so many of my emails are ignored all the time. Whereas like if you walk in and just ask to speak to someone, that's a totally done way of doing things, I think. And also it's nice, it builds relationships. Like some of the people who stock this are the first people I kind of went into a shop and spoke to. But it's a very, like, we kind of talked a little, almost touched on the industry. I'm not particularly interested in the photography industry as a whole, but I'm very interested in the photography community and kind of the things that go on and kind of building that community. And there's a lot of people out there who want to help and want to support on every level. And it's just kind of about when you make something and you do something, it's so much easier for people to support it. Like maybe they're just going to buy a copy. That's one level of support. Even sharing a post is a level of support. Like there's so many ways that those things can happen, and people do want to help when they can, I think. It's both a cutthroat world in photography and also an incredibly kind one. It's kind of the way we live, right?
Yeah.
And maybe it's just reality, but like the kindness of people is there. And I think that like you can really see it when you put something out, the support. Like I'm blown away every time by the fact that people even like pre-order or order or support. Like it means like it keeps you going really to do it. And I think that if you try something and put it out there, you'll be surprised at the kind of willingness of people to help and support, and it can be a really beautiful thing, actually.
Nice
little
end it on that one. Oh god, it's so beautiful. Amazing, Max, thank you so much for that.
No, thank you for having
DEADFALL is available to buy online now, and you're also going to be doing a book launch with us on the 7th.
An
I've got too
exhibition.
many dates in my head, and an exhibition, so please come down to that. This should hopefully be out before that happens. We'll also have available copies from the Photobook Cafe online store, so please check it out and also buy directly from the artist, because that's also very, very important. And cheers, Max.
Cheers, bro.